Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. All right, last week we wrapped up horror movies from 1993. This week we're moving right along to horror movies of 1994. And if that wasn't enough to clue you in to what the theme of this season is, I don't know what to tell you. But I will reach out because I'm kind-hearted. What's going on here is this season we are going through movies from each year of the 90s, and then we are going back and comparing those years. So the first week of a year, we will go through one movie and talk about the movies that also came out that year. The second movie we'll go through and then talk about like how that year stacks up to the other years from the 90s. So far, 91's in the lead. But this week, we're here to talk about 1994. And our criteria for selecting movies is somewhat simple. We're not going to do any movies that we've done an episode on in the past. We're not going to do any movies that are a remake or a sequel. And I've been screwing this one up every week that I've talked about it since the beginning of this season. But we're not going to do any movies that made over $100 million at the box office. I've been saying had a budget over $100 million, and that's just absurd because no horror movies did in the 90s. But that's relevant this week.
I'm refusing to believe that you made a mistake. I held it in, Daniel.
Well, here's the thing. I accidentally said 100,000 like twice by accident, and then I had to go back and like edit a voiceover to fix it. So not only did I make the mistake repeatedly, I also doubled down on the mistake in editing repeatedly. So really, listener, this is a cry for help. I've got too much on my mind right now. This season is crazy for me. This season being holiday season 2023. Mm-hmm. There's stuff just going on everywhere. I'm trying to coordinate across like 25 different people, and work has been stressful, and I'm kind of falling apart. Yeah.
Listen, listener, this is the devil side of, your shoulder, the devil on your shoulder. You fucking say anything about him making that mistake, and we'll have no listeners. You catch my drift? He's smelling what I'm stepping in. Listen, man, don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing fine.
Well, I was going to try to get away with it, actually.
You would have.
But then I realized it's actually very relevant to the discussion on this one.
Yeah, that's
the
true.
way that we're going to kick it off. So, a movie that we were not able to talk about from 1994 that wasn't eligible for us to review was Interview with the Vampire. Yeah. Because it made way too much money. So the goal of this is not to tell people about movies that were the most popular in the 90s. What we're trying to do is dig into ones that maybe people haven't seen and find some gold that you wouldn't have thought to look into otherwise. So like a really good example of that, I think, so far that we found is Jacob's Ladder. That was a really good movie. Was not on my radar whatsoever. Not that many people saw it at the time, but now it's pretty widely available. Definitely worth going back to. But this week, the other movies that we are not going to talk about because they are sequels or remakes are Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Leprechaun 2, Night of the Demons 2, Pumpkinhead 2, Blood Wings, Boogeyman 3, Return of the Boogeyman, Watchers 3, Ghoulies 4, Puppet Master 5, The Final Chapter, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, because that's in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, technically.
Ain't nothing new about it.
I heard that. So, those are the movies we're not going to be talking about. And once again, we're finding out that the reputation of the 90s for being mostly cash grab sequels is not entirely wrong, but we want to maintain that it's also not only that. So This week, we watched a movie called In the Mouth of Madness, and I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into the apparently you can hotwire a car just by hitting the steering column with a Phillips head screwdriver details.
Love it.
In 1994, New Line Cinema brought us In the Mouth of Madness, a psychological and supernatural horror film directed by John Carpenter. This movie tells the story of an insurance investigator who finds more than he bargained for when looking into the disappearance of a popular horror author. Fiction blends with fact as the investigator is forced to confront realities he can't accept. This movie was made on a budget of $8 million and brought in a little under $9 million at the box office. It can currently be streamed for free with ads, or without ads if you have the right plugin, on Tubi.
Perfect.
Had you even heard of this movie before?
No, I had zero idea about it. I had no idea going into it at all.
When you subtracted out all of the movies we couldn't talk about from this season, that really didn't leave very much. And of the not very much, there was even less available for streaming anywhere. And even from when we were planning this season, looking at movies, fewer of them are now available than were at that time. And so we didn't have a whole lot of options, but this was one that kind of kept coming up on lists for notable horror movies from 94. And so I'm glad we got a chance to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess.
Does that mean you're not glad we had to watch this one?
I'm just being melancholy. What is it?
Melancholy.
No, I'm glad we watched it too. This movie specifically reminded me of about 1,000 movies we watched in the past. Couldn't put my finger on any of them. I know it sounds weird. I get it, but it was like a mixture of Chrono, or you know what I'm saying?
Kronos.
It was like a mixture of that. It was a mixture of a Kevin Bacon one we watched, I think, a couple of seasons ago, where they're in the house and the houses make them, make them think that they're crazy. It seemed like this was influenced, I guess I'll say, by 1,000 different, including the movie M, which I don't know if you're a long-time listener, you might remember, but specifically with all the crosses at the end that were drawn in black on the main character. For some reason, that reminded me of M. Because the M on the shoulder, but anyway, definitely glad we watched it. And it definitely seems like you're going through madness, or that he was going through madness, the main character, watching this. Also, I felt like I was going through madness watching this because I didn't have any idea what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
At all times.
It was definitely a somewhat difficult to follow, which I think was kind of the point. But
But it was by design?
You never know.
Man.
But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
I'll take it.
This one seemed to me very much in the vein of a Stephen King made-for-TV movie from the time.
Yeah.
Just as far as kind of the production of it and sort of the setting and everything else, to me, I would 100% have believed that it was. And also the fact that it's about a writer, and a horror writer specifically, and then horrific things happening around him. It just seemed a little too on the nose. So I don't think this was based on anything written by Stephen King, but it sure used kind of his caricature as the focal point.
Yeah. Yeah. They definitely, they mentioned Stephen King in here, but
yes,
to me, that was definitely we're going to mention the thing that everyone's kind of thinking about already.
Yeah.
Now, granted, this is also, almost 30 years after. And so, Stephen King's only had time to his name to get bigger and bigger. But
that's true.
During, in 94, I felt like that was almost some of the height of his popularity in a way. So this for sure is has to be a nod to him. I hope it is, at least.
Yeah. And I had read that it was actually based on a H.P. Lovecraft, I think, like short story or novella or something, but still in that same like tradition of horror authors, I guess, that it's kind of honoring. So, yeah. But all that said, the movie in the beginning just kind of drops you right in the middle of it. Like you've got a guy fighting guards as he's being taken into a mental hospital. He starts getting crazier and crazier and having visions. And then a random doctor shows up to interview him. And I kind of feel like once Silence of the Lambs did it, every psychological horror movie had to have that element of like, oh yeah, we've got a crazy guy in a mental hospital, and now the doctor has to show up and talk to him to like unravel, you know, what's going on with like the larger story or the danger or whatever. So I'm curious if we'll see more of that as the 90s play on, just because that movie was so successful, you know?
That's a good point. Yeah. I guess also with Psycho too. Psycho kind of had the whole.
Oh yeah, at the very end. Yeah,
at the very end. But
Yeah.
I think that Silence of the Lambs, it has to be the direct influence of this for sure. Of that piece of it.
Yeah, and I think so. This movie reminded me a lot of Jacob's Ladder, in that they injected a lot of like suddenly you were in a dream sequence or suddenly you were in some sort of like hallucination, and then it would like kind of flip back. So you were constantly wondering like what was real versus what was being imagined versus like what was a dream. And there were times when that was really effective. Like in the beginning, there's that scene towards the beginning at least where the insurance adjuster like figured out that the guy was trying to defraud the insurance company, and then the guy who hired him is impressed and is offering him a job, and then there's the guy with the axe that just comes walking across the street and then like breaks through the window and attacks him, and like then the cops end up shooting him. Like it was super intense, and it just went from this super bland kind of boring scene where it's like, oh yeah, aren't you good at being an insurance adjuster? And he's like, yep, I sure am. And then all of a sudden like there's just this random like action and danger, and you have no idea what the backstory is or what's going on. And I thought that was like a really gripping way to like grab your attention and pull you in for kind of where it's starting to kick off the main story.
Which I think it's actually interesting you brought up Jacob's Ladder, because I definitely noticed a lot of ties to this one, or what I thought would be like a lot of connection between the two. And I thoroughly enjoyed Jacob's Ladder, so maybe that's why I was a little bit more. Judgmental of this film. But I will say that beginning, like the scene that you're just talking about, where with the axe and all that. You know, I have a thing with eyes, man. It's my thing, right? It freaks me out. Just look out the window and see like eyes staring at you. The double like whatever they're called, like the iris or whatever, they had double pupils basically in their eyes. Tripped me out, freaked me out. Did not like it. And you saw at the beginning, right before the axe comes down, you're just like, "Geesh, this is gnarly." But this one didn't. I guess that's technically, you know, what I would consider the beginning of the film. But started out with the pretty big bang, which I definitely love.
I feel like this movie was at its best at those moments.
Yes.
Like every now and then there was the really intense scene that kind of came out of nowhere that left you questioning what was going on. And it really delivered on what we talk about, like that horror dread feeling where it's like, it's not necessarily a jump scare, but it's more like something creepy or scary has happened. And now you're a little bit on edge. And so you're like engaged in the movie because you want to know what happens next, because you're like subconsciously waiting for like a reason to stop feeling that horror dread. And there were times where that was used really effectively, and then they like did something with it and made it pay off. There were other times though where it felt like it just kind of got like stuck in the mud a little bit, and then it just didn't make sense. Like he's having weird dreams while he's reading the books, and then all of a sudden he somehow figures out that if he cuts out the book covers according to some pattern that I couldn't figure out, it forms a map. But it just looked totally random. Like I feel like I just completely missed something there that was supposed to be a plot point. And so I was just confused, and that took me out of the moment of like having any sort of anxiety or being like scared about what was happening.
Yeah. Unanswered unanswered steps throughout the film. I felt like that was definitely a prime example. I think there was also the thing, like the early on dream sequences made sense to me. Like that wasn't a problem. It was just, I guess maybe like halfway through, like 3/4, it was just like that you've already done it once, I guess, and you're trying to kind of do it again, but you need to at least explain a little bit of how we got here. I couldn't tell you anything about them, like how it was figured out that they got this map thing figured. I mean,
yeah,
I just couldn't tell you. Like I couldn't even attempt it. I don't even want to try to attempt it. And it was just like throughout the whole thing, and my mind definitely wanders pretty bad. And so if I get out, I think I stop thinking about that, and I'm just thinking about like making whatever for Christmas, or like I'm just out of it, and I think that's what kind of hurt it. Whereas I think if we're not really good insurance investigators, we work with computers, we're not investigators. Explain to us a little bit as to why he's so good, at least, or like why he
right.
like how he can figure out
somehow, like why he has something. A special skill. Yeah.
Otherwise, like I think a lot of people are going to kind of be confused. And when you have a story that's really like this is a really cool story, super gnarly, it's like it could be up there with like the Jacob ladder. It's just explain, wrap it up or something, explain something to me here.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of the movie was the part where they drove to the town that was marked on the map, which was allegedly where the author was supposed to be hiding. But it ended up being this fictional town from one of his books. And they get there and it's really creepy and weird. But also it's the woman who was traveling with him worked for the publisher, so she knew the books really well, and so she was doing this thing where she like called out all this stuff that was about to happen because it was in the book. But it's just like that. I feel like they just doubled down on the same tricks like over and over, so it's like, okay, yeah, like that's creepy, but it was creepy the first few times. Like we didn't need like 8 more to drive the point home. And there were some things that they did in there that I thought were really good that they never came back to or like built back on. And one of those was the whole, like the lady who was running the bed and breakfast and like the guy who was chained to her ankle.
Yeah.
Like that was just weird.
My gosh.
Seemingly for no reason.
His hand was legit shake. Like, he had like the old man trimmer.
Yeah.
I think that we need to investigate like how legit that was, man.
Yeah.
That freaked me out just from that trimmer. And if that was on the actor, he should have a star on whatever street they put that on.
Yeah. That was great. I mean, that part, it was just like one of the creepiest scenes I've seen in a movie this season, right? And then they had the other one where he's trying to get away and he's knocked the woman out and put her in the car, and he's driving off and then stops at the payphone, and then she comes out of the car and she's like on all fours and her neck is like twisting all the way around. Like again, super creepy. Like the makers of this movie had it in their bag to deliver really creepy, like psychologically disturbing scenes, which is exactly what this movie was trying to be. It was like a psychological horror, but it just didn't. It was the in between where it would just kind of get lost a little bit for me, or they would make some huge jump in the story that was really just more confusing than anything. Because I don't mind if a story doesn't completely make sense if I don't have time to think about it. But when I have too much time to think about it, then it's just a distraction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because I'll say like the special effects, like when with the characters that have the messed up faces and all that, and like the upside down, like the weird bear walking upside down thing. Chef's kiss. That's A plus. Like,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Beautiful. I just want to know how we got there and where we're going.
Yeah.
That's the, and really, like, that complaint. I mean, I guess that's like what I would consider like my biggest complaint about it. But like in retrospect, it's not that bad. I'm saying I like what we got here. I just want to understand it. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by that, the being lost piece of it. But the scenes like with the old man being chained, or any of the horror scenes that they did, I thought was pulled off pretty well. I'm sure there were some that I didn't care for. I just probably forgot. But
well, I guess that's what you get when John Carpenter directs, but somebody else writes.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
The creepy scenes deliver, the incomprehensible plot is still hard to follow, but yeah. So.
Which is difficult, like, to talk about anything else, I find, because like that's what else. That's a pretty important part of horror films, the plot. And so it's like that's like we didn't harp on the music with Leprechaun past 10 minutes of that episode, because that was a minor part of it, a part that we both thoroughly enjoy, but still an actual minor part of filmmaking. The plot is huge.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then I guess, so another thing that I guess is the big part of the plot, or the big thing that was driving this forward, was the author, whose name is Kane, had, I guess, somehow run away to this city, and he was living in the church in the middle of it, and he'd like kidnapped some of the children, but then like the people were kind of dying off, like melting or something, which didn't make sense to me if he was like the creator and he was there, but whatever. And he was saying a lot of creepy stuff, like, for years I thought I was making this up, but they were telling me what to write. And so it's the idea that they're like demons or voices or something. And then towards the end, he tells the guy, like this town, it wasn't here before I wrote it, and neither were you. So then you're starting to think, like, is this main guy just like a character from the books? And it's like confusing, but it's not really scary. And then I'm not going to lie, I watched this right after, like the day after I got back from Japan.
Ooh.
And I might have nodded off for a little bit
Gotcha.
towards the end. But it ended with the main guy back in the mental institution, and he like comes out of his room and he goes into a theater and he's watching his earlier statements in the movie about how, oh, well, this can all be explained with logic, or this is all, just simple tricks or a publicity stunt or whatever. And then he's just like kind of maniacally laughing at himself.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great ending. I think that was from the way that they set up the movie to the way they put that at the very end, I thought was just good bookends for the story and for driving home that like psychological element that they were trying to do. But I can't really speak to how well they made the transition from when he was in the town back to when he was in the asylum. Do you have any insight on that one?
Oh gosh. No. No. I mean, I'm definitely not farting around when I said I have no idea what happened with this. I mean, picked up the pieces, of like, okay, well, this is either this dude's writing the story and it's happening as it's being written. I don't know.
Yeah. But like,
I think that's okay. The sad part, I think, is now I'm just kind of like judging myself and my I just don't know if I don't think I can learn anything anymore, is where I'm getting at. If I can't figure this movie out, then where am I at with life? That's where I'm like, I have that dread going on right now.
Well, I also didn't figure much of it out even before.
Yeah, but you have an excuse. Through, so. You slept.
Yeah.
I watched it.
But yeah, overall, the idea of this, I think, was not terrible. The idea of like there's this horror author and he's tapped into some supernatural thing and he's become so popular that his novels have become like addictive, like they're unleashing some sort of evil force into the world and it's pulling more people in, and that's kind of the way the world is starting to end. And what's that?
Like through the, like when they're reading the books.
Yeah.
Is that what's,
Yeah, it's almost like his books and his stories are like a channel between this supernatural malevolence and the real world. And that's a kind of a cool concept. And then the idea that he would hide in one of the towns from that sort of demon realm or whatever it is, like that's interesting. And then this guy having this very psychologically like weird experience as how all this is being unfolded, to me made it a lot more effective than just like a normal detective story, because there were all the sort of supernatural and psychological elements. And so I know that I have not exactly praised this movie so far, but on the whole, there were some cool elements and some really great scenes. And I think that it was just kind of the execution of the plot that was not quite all the way there. But there were still a lot of things I found to like about it. And I think it's one that, like, talking about it, I feel more positive about than I did right after I watched it.
Yeah. The meat and potatoes of this movie, I liked. The effects, the horror scenes,
Carrots and onions? Nah.
They can kiss my ass. Yep. Green beans, kiss my ass. Cornbread, kiss my ass. I don't know what happened.
Don't you ever talk about cornbread that way.
This cornbread... box made stuff, man. But that doesn't sound like a compliment. I promise it is. Like,
right. Yeah.
It's like you did great. It definitely just seemed like this is just like the equivalent. Like, you explaining a story is Jacob's Ladder. Me explaining a story is this one. I get off and I don't know where I'm at, and then I come back and I'm lost. That's just the way I see it. I think that this one could be up there filmmaking wise and horror wise with that. That's the piece that kind of struck out for me. So did I hate it? No, absolutely not. I didn't turn it off. So it definitely beats at least one movie of this decade, but I think it's okay though. Like I'm doing just fine. And I think this movie should be happy that that's the case, because otherwise our listener would hear one podcaster talking even worse about it if I could. But I just don't know what it's about, so I didn't really talk much.
Yeah, and I generally liked the way they wrapped it up. I think that it was a good horror ending, which is the thing that always makes me more positive about a movie, is like if it ended dark, then it's like, okay, you were committed to being a horror movie. Mm-hmm. You weren't trying to be Hollywood. So
like, it's not, not Hollywood ending. Also, not a Hollywood ending. That's a good ending for this.
Yeah. And there was no, as far as I know, at least, In the Mouth of Madness 3 Lost in Space or anything like that. Like, it didn't try to be over the top or to do more with it. Like, this one wasn't set out to try and create like a new cash-in franchise. It really felt like almost like a little bit artistic of I want to make this scary movie about this concept that I think is cool, and props to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, not a bad start to 94. We've definitely, like you said, watched some much worse movies so far this season. But next week we're going to be back with another one that just almost did not qualify for this list.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm so glad that it did, because it's one I've never seen and I've been waiting for an excuse, and it's going to be great. I have high hopes for 94. The last couple seasons, or last couple years of the 90s have just kind of been at the bottom of the rankings. Mm-hmm. But I think 94 is a real contender, man.
I think it, hey, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Heard that. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
We are recording in the mouth of madness.
You might be. Do whatever the hell I want. My own time.
I am.